Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke discuss a series of claims being made that argue that the tide is, finally, turning against critical social justice. Sadly, Elizabeth and Mike find no evidence for this, beyond a series of Pyrrhic victories, and come to the conclusion that critical social justice remains in power, at least in the West's most consequential institutions. Finally, they conclude that the tide very well may be turning among the general public, however, which is extremely dangerous, given that it sets the public on a collision course with the elite. Hello, and welcome back to the Dissidents Podcast. So often when it's just Elizabeth and I, we usually go through an article that gives us some kind of insight into the madness of critical social justice, often psychology, philosophy, that kind of thing. Today we're going to do something a bit different because there's been a series of articles actually recently that have been claiming that some kind of tide has turned against critical social justice. Probably the most obvious example right now would be, what's her name, Claudine Gay? Is that Claudine?
Right. And so,
Claudine
yes.
Gay at Harvard, who basically plagiarized so much stuff that it was actually quite funny, and that may even get you kicked off a course as an undergraduate. Certainly a very stern talking to would be administered.
Yeah, I mean, I have a slightly different opinion on the, a lot of what was called plagiarism. I do really think was sort of, technical, legal statutes. Some of the things that came up, some of these like Turnitin and some of these programs, over identify things as plagiarism. But there were certainly, her acknowledgments were plagiarized. Now, I mean, so I do think that it was what shocked, I shouldn't say shocked me, but what interested me was was sort of the lack of maybe embarrassment. Like I would be really embarrassed. Like, we're working on a book and I would be mortified, right? If they came back and said, oh, like 5 years from now and said, oh, there's this paragraph
being lifted,
Yeah, because we know that as we're doing this, stuff gets moved around within like massive, 100-page, documents. And sometimes a reference could get like detached. And then you've rewritten it so many times that you don't necessarily realize how much of something is yours. And I don't know. So, I can see how things could happen. There were quite a few, and some of them I thought were minor and even maybe appropriate use of exactly the same language, especially with regard to any statistics or whatever. But I really don't think she lost her job because of what happened in testimony in front of Congress. I do think she lost her job because of the plagiarism. I think that's, Wink and I did a whole podcast on that. I think that's too bad. I would have liked to have seen them really spend time re-evaluating everything. Like, maybe she would have, stepped down in a year or 6 months after there had been more reflection on the whole. How did somebody get there that had questionable, maybe a questionable history with regard to research or something, and a really more reflective look. I think Harvard lucked out. They got, they got a scapegoat, and she gets to, there was an article in the Boston Globe. So I live just south of Boston. And so I read the Boston Globe every day. And there's an article about how she went to a basketball game the other day, a women's basketball game, and people were hugging her and telling her how she was, wronged and that kind of thing. So, she's getting a shitload better treatment than most canceled people are getting. She got a little taste of her own medicine.
Who did nothing wrong?
That's right. And even people that she actively, endorsed cancellation or even initiated cancellation. So, I don't feel sorry for her by any means. I I'm not sure a lot's going to change. And this is what's happening is we're getting these headlines, especially headlines, but full articles that are saying, the tide, a version of the tide has turned. So, Claudine Gay's resignation signals the end of DEI's dominance. DEI, 10 years of DEI work, is extinguished in a matter of days. Even one of the things that really kind of caught my attention was, we have Lee Jussim sometimes on the podcast, and he has a Substack, which is awesome. And he had 2 entries that were sort of the tide has turned. Like one of them was actually entitled like the victory lap. And it is very personal for him. I mean, he has certainly, been targeted, and at his university, he's been certainly supported by many, and perhaps even celebrated by a few for his work. And so I don't want to take anything away from that, because I'm obviously very, very happy for him.
Absolutely.
But
he's wrong.
I don't think the tide has turned, and I don't think we should take any victory laps.
So let's slow this down a second. She lost her job. She may have lost her job because of her wokeness, right? So she may have lost her job because people were motivated because of her wokeness to dig into her background, right?
And because of her testimony, which was, somewhat hypocritical, right? Just saying like, it depends on the context. Words depend on context, which is absolutely true. Words are not violence, right? And at the same time, when you have spent the last 10 years saying words are violence when it comes to racism, it's you're skating on pretty thin ice there.
But to be clear, her wokeness, if anything, almost saved her. Like, certainly it had lots of people in Harvard very enthusiastically getting behind her. And now as she's kind of leaving, she's not losing a career. And everybody's kind of slapping her on the back like she's some kind of returning hero. And, thank you for the sacrifice you made, aren't you wonderful?
Yes.
That's what's happening to her.
Yeah.
Right? It's nothing. Yeah. It's absolutely nothing compared to a cancellation. And in many ways, it's kind of like a big bump in social status for her. Right? There is a kind of silver lining for her.
Wink was saying, like, why hasn't she written a book? She's a Harvard scholar.
Oh, she will.
Why hasn't
she
now she will.
Now she will.
No, now she will.
Exactly. Yeah, apparently her track record is pretty dreadful, which goes to show, you can become the president of Harvard even if you have a dreadful track record by virtue of the color of your skin, and probably, at least as importantly, that you belong to this bizarre cult. I mean, it's what they seem to be. That believes a whole load of things that aren't true, and things that are also, as well as not being true, internally incoherent as well. But that having those low moral and intellectual standards and being proud of them and being very open about that is apparently what elevates you at the most prestigious university, if not in the world, then certainly in the United States.
Well, I would suggest possibly the opposite. Well, I shouldn't say the opposite, but that, again, because of her, wokeness and some of the things that she had accomplished, at Stanford and at Harvard in terms of those kinds of things, she was, noticed, and so, put on a short list or whatever. And more so than because of her publication, research, track record, or whatever, there weren't any red flags. So she had all of the woke social justice credentials, if you will, because I don't really know what those are. She has a modest publication record. Many people have come out and said that they're kind of, like they're unimpressed with her work and, that kind of thing. I honestly haven't read her, it's not my field. And so I haven't read it. But others and others have come out and said, that she maybe, plagiarized, I'm sorry, borrowed heavily from their work in the sense of ideas, and that they weren't, Swain, I can't remember her first name, last name Swain, has,
Carol
complained.
Swain.
I'm thinking it might be Carol. Yeah.
Yeah.
Came out and said, there's no excuse, even if she hadn't read the book, but she's saying, like, I suspect that Claudine Gay had read the book, but even if by happenstance she hadn't read the book, there's no reason why her advisors wouldn't have read it. And so perhaps all along, sort of, the way has been, cleared for her. Things have been easier, like they've cleared the weeds and just kind of, smoothed along. And this was just another step. So,
I mean, you're being far kinder to her than I would be. And there's a podcast in the hopper that will be released in which I just go after her. And, like, I'm not ambivalent about calling for genocide. And, I'm not happy with that because I'm, again, I'm of the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And my standard of free speech is that of the United Kingdom, where calling for genocide is unambiguously illegal, and I believe that she should be locked up. And I get why you disagree with me, and it's not because you think that saying these things is okay. It's just you're worried about power being given to certain people, which is a very American thing. You're an American, so I understand. Anyway, I would put her in the Tower of London personally.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, but that aside, I think that, if it's a victory, it's a very Pyrrhic one. I think for there to be a turning of the tide, then all of the things that you said were raised as ticking all the ideological boxes, then they would start to become red flags in and of themselves.
Or
right?
certainly not prose, right? Right, exactly. So they would have either a null effect or, essentially I guess I would suggest they would have a null effect. They, I don't begrudge somebody that line of research, right? If that's their research area, fine, go for it. Let the marketplace of ideas, decide whether that's, a good pursuit or not. And so if she has this really great track record that is truly research, not philosophy of political science or something like that. I mean, there certainly people, do that kind of research, but I would want to see empirical research. I would want to see, like other research that would be appropriate for political science, not just, I mean, it's one thing if you're a philosopher, but if you're a political scientist, I would want to see, a variety of research. And, that the topic would be essentially a null, uh, effect on whether you would get the job or not. And that's not, I think, what we're seeing. I think we're seeing that the topic is what kicked her, into the pool.
Yeah, and I think that within most of academia, if not all of academia, within the United States, the United Kingdom, and much further abroad, these flags, if you like, these kind of boxes, that the woke boxes to tick, remain very, very advantageous. Right. I mean,
And I sent you, I sent you just a smattering of things that I had read in the last couple of weeks, and every one of them. I mean, there was one in the Boston Globe on Sunday. I just sent you, and whether there was no need for you to necessarily read it because you can tell from the headline. It says the headline, and it was a multi-page spread about how universities are not bastions of liberal thought. That is complete crap. I mean, I don't know where people are and also that they're not producing, that universities are not producing more liberal thinkers. And, I mean, I can point to, research in psychology that started with the beginnings of Bennington College, which was an all-women's college. And it was during the Depression. And so people didn't have money. The only people who had money to send their girls, especially to college, were rich people. They send their girls to college. And so these are conservative people who were raised in conservative, places. They get exposed to liberal ideas, unbeknownst to the parents. Most of the university professors were more liberal thinkers, and when they followed these college students for 50 years, and those students, those women, were still more liberal 50 years later. So I think that it's a natural thing. There's again hundreds of studies showing that simply learning more about the world tends to skew people to more liberal thinking. Okay, learning more. So, expanding your knowledge, your curiosity, so just going to college tends to move people towards liberal. Then if you add in, a majority liberal, college professors, you're going to get a little more skewing towards liberal. So the idea, again, I'm not even talking about woke ideology. I'm not talking about any of that. I'm just talking about, the 75 years of research that suggests that essentially more learning equals more liberal thinking, and that college in particular, exposure to college professors and who are going to maybe just sort of like accentuate more certain ideas, maybe assign readings according to their own bias, even if they don't know they're doing it. I'm not talking about woke ideology. I'm just, even if they don't know they're doing it, maybe choosing readings or something. So there's going to be a little bit more skewing to the left. So that article that I sent you suggesting that, that's just nonsense is, again, not even talking about woke ideology. That article is nonsense. So then you add in the wokeness, and their own arguments that our biases as college professors have been influencing people in a racist way. Then they're saying, well, the way to get rid of that bias is to introduce this new bias. So instead of just saying, could you try to, encourage, and they do say this, but in a much more forceful way, but be more inclusive, try to encourage professors to include more articles that are multicultural, not just American, those kinds of things. Instead, we have to go the other way, which is, if you include something historical written by someone who's a white male, for example, then you're a racist, so that article was bullshit. So we'll just throw that. So that whole article was making a ridiculous claim. And a couple of Chronicle of Higher Ed articles that I sent you, similar kind of thing. I don't know. And then, like I said, the Lee Jussim one, which I'm happy for him, but not happy to have people talk. Oh, and I was going to say too, that's academic kind of stuff and journalism. But I happen to go to a gym. It's got to be the only in this area of Massachusetts. I think everyone who is an extreme right-wing Republican goes to this gym. I mean, It is I didn't know that when I joined it. I joined it because it's close by. But this is an extremely, conservative, and I'm talking they're out there. One day during the Me Too thing, somebody said in front of me, within earshot, that someone should rape Nancy Pelosi so she'd have her own Me Too moment. So these are very outspoken right-wing Republicans. Okay. And they are telling, because they know that I'm more liberal than they are telling me, oh, it's coming around, this is, we're winning, and DEI is dying and stuff. So it's not just academics and journalists who are saying that things are changing. It's also boots on the ground. And when I'm experiencing my life at my day-to-day life at my university, I am not seeing that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing it within the academic sphere either. I'm really not. I'm very liberal in all of my views. I'm a philosophical conservative, but that doesn't make me a Republican, right? There's nobody who really understands what philosophical conservatism is, but because it doesn't really relate to the left and right distinction these days. So I'm very pro-gay rights, obviously anti-racism in how it is traditionally conceived. All of those things. I'm very accepting of trans people. I'm open to and accepting of the reality of people who don't feel like they fit on either side of the gender spectrum. I don't come down hard on any of those people, and I want to afford them as much acceptance as I can. So I'm by no means a reactionary right-wing type, but nevertheless, by expressing values that would have been considered a typical 1990s left-wing liberal, right? In the time of Friends and Nirvana and stuff like that. I'm now labelled far right because I don't have any woke points and because I speak out against the ideology, which is, preposterous, but that still happens. And if that happens, if it's difficult for me to find a job with those kind of very common values that, by the way, most people in academia still hold to, but are afraid to articulate, which is why it isn't powerful. My career is very difficult in academia, finding jobs and things like that. It's very, very hard. So I don't feel like there's been a turning point at all. And if this is one step towards it, then that's great. And if I'm wrong, I'd be delighted, but it really doesn't feel like that at all. I'm kind of surprised that Lee would make that claim, to be honest. Usually he's a very empirical thinker. And so if you're going to make a very bold claim like that, so you're talking about the claim would be the departure from the status quo, right? Then I would feel that there should be some empirical evidence to suggest that that's happened, and I don't see that.
He offered, his own personal experience, yes,
right, which is anecdotal.
Anecdotal and at his university. So his experience at his university, his experience in terms of, psychological science and, being offered, some internal opportunities and, that kind of thing. So he offers, and yeah, absolutely an anecdotal, description. And I just
but he's a sample size of one, and again, I'm really happy for Lee. I'm lovely.
I know. We're not criticizing
his empirical work is top notch. But I'm just surprised that he would kind of make this claim, on the basis of him as a sample size of one.
Yeah, I didn't like the title of Victory Lap. Victory Lap.
Victory Lap for him, fine.
Yes.
But for the, if he should add those extra to my Victory Lap, one word, great. Yeah. Well done. And by the way, let me stand in the crowd and clap you on and feel very appreciative.
Right. And offer up those as examples to the people that we have to deal with. Like, look, there's another way to go because
it can be done.
Right.
It can be done.
We can pull it back a little bit.
But it's really hard. But to argue that there is some sort of cultural shift within academia, I think I really don't see any evidence of that. And if you wanted to make that claim, you would certainly need more empirical evidence than a sample size of one.
So I want to offer some evidence that it's not. So this is a sample size of one also. But I want to offer it. But I'm going to offer it up.
You're not departing from the norm, right? So that's okay. You're just reaffirming what the norm is. So okay.
Yeah.
And what all the data suggests.
I am comparing So universities have to go through an accreditation process every
Mhm.
10 years around here. Okay, so every 10 years. And it's not always the same, like accreditation organizations change a little bit. I don't really know why. But basically, universities have to report on the previous 10 years. So the last accreditation report, this is what we said we were going to do. And here's, how we did that. And, please judge us, positively on those things. And here's the plan for the future. So every 10 years, they're sort of looking backward at the last 10 and making the 10-year plan for the future. So I happen to have been on the accreditation thing in 2012. So, I had the report. I mean, not that it's not available, but I would have had to go digging, but I didn't have to go digging. I actually had it saved. And I also, when the 2022 report was released, basically almost at the end of 2023, basically, no, at the end of 2022, then I, downloaded that, and just for giggles, I did a word search. Okay, so in 2012, the word, now I did not look at context or anything. The word racial in 2012 was in the report 12 times. The word racial was in the 2022. So this is the plan and the report back. So this is the document. So it includes the plan, which means this is what we are going to be evaluated on in 2032, right?
Okay.
So in the next 10 years, we have to do what we said we're going to do in order to get accreditation. Okay. Or to get approved. Okay. So racial, 12 times in 2012, 77 times in 2022. The word equal, 14 times in 2012, 32 times in 2022. The word equity, 2 times in 2012. The word equity, 108 times in 2022.
That's
Yes.
the most dangerous of all of them.
Yes. Ethnic, 4 times in 2012. Ethnic, 13 times in 2022. Justice, 38 times in 2012. 110 times in 2022. Words like learning, knowledge, teaching actually was 141 in 2012 and only 48 in 2022. So it actually reduced the teaching. So we're focused on other stuff now. Decolonialism and anti-racism did show up a few times in the 2022 report, not a ton. But we have this big equity thing, this big justice thing. I mean, it's huge. And these are the things that we're going to be not only, these are the things that they said are important for the next 10 years. So this is a commitment to the accreditation organization that we will address these things. So even if, let's just pretend that the tide has turned, right? And that there are people at my university who woke up and said, I now see that this was a threat to academic freedom and to, and that this is a new form of potential racism and that kind of stuff. And we're going to commit ourselves, to, they can't because for 10 years, we have to do this. So even if the tide has turned, we still have to continue on this path for a minimum of 10 years because that's what we've committed to as a university. And there's no way that my university is the only one that has done this. There's no freaking way.
There's no way that it's an outlier.
No. And it has shown up in the only reason it's not in our union contract that we have to do these things is because I had contacted FIRE and sent them all of this union negotiation. They wanted to put in the union contracts that our research had to address equity, racial issues, decolonialism, in order for us to get tenure. So, I mean, I don't see this as the tide has turned.
No, I mean, the only thing I would say so first of all, yes, you're completely right. There is no evidence that the tide has turned on this at all. If anything, there have been a few Pyrrhic victories, certainly great. And, again, if we're wrong, then we'd be very happy. But the evidence doesn't point in that direction at all. The only ray of light, maybe, would be if all of this stuff was declared null and void because it's compelled speech.
Right. And if people haven't listened to the podcast with Rio and Helen, they should, because Rio makes a point that he really thinks that the legal route is what's going to eventually make a difference. That was his argument.
It's a very strong argument, right? Because these organizations receive an awful lot of money from the US government. So therefore, even if they are entirely private, they nevertheless have to abide by the same legal restrictions that everybody else does, right? You can't compel your employees to say certain things or to express certain religious views or political ones either. And it would be very hard to argue to any half intelligent person, let alone a Supreme Court justice, that this does not represent compelled speech and is therefore not highly unconstitutional. And I think that's the way it's going to go. I saw Peter Boghossian made a bet with Chris Rufo that the Democratic Party are going to dump DEI, right? He said, I think forgive me if I'm wrong, if I've misheard this, but lots of people are saying that, the Democratic Party are going to dump DEI. This is going to happen. I don't see any evidence of that either. I saw Biden the other day made a massive speech in some black church, the one that was victimized by that white supremacist who went and killed a bunch of people, that nutter. And he was making this big speech about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and this is before election. So it seems that the Democrat Party, or at least, the section of it that Biden is representative of, if anything, they're doubling down. So, I see no evidence of people turning on this ideology within academia. I see no evidence of it weakening within the US Democrat Party. In the UK, the Conservatives, when they were elected, they made some noises about cracking down on this, and it would seem to make sense for the Conservative Party in the UK to crack down on it because their base absolutely hates it. And it's not even popular amongst the left-wing people in the country, the majority of them. So it would seem like an easy win, but it's so embedded within the civil service and the NHS and so on in the UK that they didn't have the political will to go through and crack down on it. So it's not even under a Conservative government in the UK that openly said that they were going to go and do something about this. They've not done anything about it either. So I don't see it within the political sector in the UK. I don't see it within the education sector in the UK. I don't see it losing any power there. In terms of entertainment, which is another really important area, right? Because these are the areas that the other one being journalism. We'll get into that in a second. In terms of entertainment, I don't see it going there either. I mean, for example, like Doctor Who, which was my favorite. Do you know Doctor Who?
A little bit. I know that my niece and nephew just loved it. Yeah.
Right. So it was my thing. It started in the 80s, and then there was a hiatus, and then this guy called Russell T Davies brought it back in the 2000s, and he brought back a kind of a more progressive version of Doctor Who, and they had there was this bisexual, bit like Rio, kind of American hero called Captain Jack, who was one of my favorite characters, and he was kind of flirting with absolutely everybody, and I just thought that was really, really cool, and I just really liked him as a character. And they had gay people on there and black people, and it was a really great show, but it was never preachy. It was never like, oh, the whole of society is racist and everybody's out to get me. It was more a normalization of these people, because in the early 2000s, those people were perfectly normal. There were bigots in the 1990s, but there weren't very many of them. There were even less of them in the 2000s. There are a lot more of them now, thanks to wokeism. But it reflected society at that time, and it was great. It was a great piece of entertainment. And then it went through different showrunners, and this guy called Chris Chibnall took over, and he had a female doctor, and everybody was all right with that as well. Great, and pretty decent actor. But it all started to become very, very preachy. Do you know what I mean? Where it's all, everything comes about, instead of having these great characters celebrating, everything starts to become about racism or about disability or about this and that and this, the viewing figures fell off. Because the one place where wokeism has not made any inroads is with the general public, who hate it, right? Because all of these franchises are failing. So then the guy that brought it back, who successfully resurrected it in the 2000s, Russell T Davies, who created this really, really brilliant version of Doctor Who that reflected society then, came back, and he brought back a previous Doctor who was the most popular Doctor, right, under his reign. And everyone's thinking, oh, he's going to save it. Oh, he's going to save it. And oh my God, he doubled down on it. He doubled down. He made it even more woke than the previous one. And so immediately, like within the first episode back, the Doctor sees an alien and he says, oh, I wonder where he's from. Excuse me, you just assumed his pronoun. How do you know he's an alien? I was like, oh, for fuck.
Well, what about Lord of the Rings?
Oh my God.
They ruined that.
They absolutely ruined it.
Yeah.
Like, if you want to have a female kick-ass character, then go ahead and have one. Like Lara Croft. One of my favorites. I love the Tomb Raider games. And she's a really intelligent, kick-ass character. She's not like a girly girl, pretty princess or anything like that. Buffy the Vampire Slayer, we had these kinds of people, but you don't need to take existing characters and because you're just going to alienate people that way. I mean, for example, let me give you a non-woke example. Star Wars. So, do you remember Yoda from the original series?
Yes.
Right? So Yoda is this amazing Force user, right? But there's something kind of deeply philosophical and magical about him, right? So in a way, you don't see him charging around with a lightsaber kind of killing people because he doesn't need to. He's a different sort of mystical kind of ascended character. He would use the Force on its own. And then and this has nothing to do with wokeness, and then in the early 2000s, George Lucas made 3 more Star Wars prequels, and now suddenly Yoda's spinning around and bouncing off the walls with a lightsaber. And it's like, you just ruined the character. Right? You've got rid of all of the kind of the mystique of the character. And that was the same with Galadriel, right? Galadriel was this kind of ethereal woman who wouldn't charge around with a sword because she was almost too powerful for that. She was kind of above that. Even Gandalf is kind of deferential towards her.
Yes.
And then suddenly she's running around with a sword. It's just like, you've just ruined that character. In the same way that Yoda was ruined. Now, you ruined it because your motivation was woke. George Lucas wasn't motivated by wokeism to ruin Yoda. But it achieves the same effect. So, it destroys that. And look, all of these franchises are failing.
And they added Jar Jar Binks in one of them.
And that wasn't woke either, and that was terrible.
It was terrible. Don't do that.
Don't mess with the formula. But of course, now, like with the new Star Wars films, the most recent ones, the most recent trilogy, when they brought back Luke Skywalker, it was kind of like, did you see them? He was a homeless person, a broken, miserable old man living on an island on his own, just a grumpy old curmudgeon. And that was not Luke Skywalker.
That's like Fat Thor.
Yeah, Thor's a woman now.
He hated Fat Thor. I'm like, no, Thor can't be that way.
Thor is a woman now. Did you know that?
Yes, I did know that. Yes, yeah.
and again, look, you want to go to Norse mythology and you want to have female warriors, there's the Valkyrie. There are all kinds of female deities that were warriors.
There's Wonder Woman.
There's Wonder Woman.
Those are amazing. That was an amazing. That first movie was amazing. Yeah.
You know, there are all of these characters within Marvel, within Norse mythology, within Tolkien's work, within, and you can also make new ones. There's no need to kind of gender swap everybody.
Yeah,
It just
exactly.
alienates people.
Yeah.
And then you're told then you're told that because... Go ahead.
They've got all these different universes too. So you could have one in a different universe, you know. I mean, you could do that. You could have a female Spider-Man in, you know, a different universe, right? Because they could meet.
There is a Spider-Woman. I bet you there already is one. Or there's certainly a Batwoman, isn't there?
That's the thing. In the actual like comics, there's, you know, all different shapes, sizes, and varieties. They're just not necessarily all that popular.
So here's the thing. There's always been all these different shapes, sizes, and varieties that you can draw on. They've always been there within the 1980s and the 1990s. You can always make these characters, existing characters, more prominent, right? Maybe they weren't popular in the 1980s and the 1990s because society was different then, but you can draw from them, put them to the forefront, make movies about them. There's no need to change the existing characters with which people have an emotional connection with, because they grew up with them. And then the insistence is that because
don't do well.
No, they don't, because what happens is people are like, well, that's not my Spider-Man, that's not my Superman, that's not my Batman, that's not my Luke Skywalker, that's not what I grew up with. And it's like, if you want to have an old grumpy man who's a Jedi on an island, then make another person do it. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Luke Skywalker. You don't have to tamper with these memories. Again, if you want to have a strong, powerful female character, you can draw on the past lore of Marvel or Star Wars or whatever, or just make a new one. You don't need to change these people. And people are getting frustrated because the things that they cared about are being messed around with. And then they're told, oh, it's because you're sexist or you're racist. And it's like, how do you explain that when Janeway was hugely popular? You know, but not just Buffy, Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica was hugely popular.
Well, even, I just look back at, you know, the television that I grew up with. And, you know, I mean, when I, you know, sort of do a retrospective and I see all of this, you know, it's like, wait a minute, there was a lot of diversity on television, and people just didn't talk about it. It wasn't preachy. It was just there. And I mean, you know, I grew up when Bill Cosby, like, he essentially owned the world. I mean, he owned, you know, CBS, you know, and I mean,
Oprah?
You know, I'm not Oprah, you know, all this. And there were just, you know, tons of television shows with diversity that, you know, that I saw, and I never gave it a thought.
Second thought.
No. But now, if you don't think about it.
Fresh Prince in the 1990s, huge. Absolutely massive show.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when they did an all-black version of The Wizard of Oz called Oz, which I thought was really good. And back then, nobody gave it a second thought. But now, if you took a TV show and made it all black, people would be pissed off because this stuff is being rammed down their throat. And it's the preachiness. It's the preachiness. You're a racist. You need to realize fuck off, I'm not. You don't need to preach to me and convert me to your weird little religion. If you want to have black people or trans people or gay people or whatever on TV, then do. We had it for decades, and it was wonderful.
Right.
Nobody was against it. Okay, not nobody. A few completely inconsequential bigots at the fringes of society may not have liked it, or some very, very old people. But nobody really cared. But now you've made people care because you've been so preachy about your little religion. Right. And this is why you know, this is why you're starting to see, unfortunately, a backlash against gay people. When it wasn't gay people that were responsible for this. You know, so no, I don't see any evidence of it changing, of the tide turning in entertainment. I see entertainment dying and failing.
And unfortunately, education, you know, not doing so hot either. And I was thinking, in addition to everything that we're talking about here, there's also there's the personal investment that people have made. So it's in their very fiber, essentially PhDs who are, say, 45 and younger, sort of were indoctrinated into this as they were getting their degrees and stuff. And then when, they start to, do their publications, sort of like, Claudine Gay, everybody can write a paper about diversity.
Oh,
So
I can write one
this
in 5
isn't,
minutes.
yeah, exactly. So lots of people got publication records, or got, there's like special university awards at my university for, for the most, anti-racist who's he what's and the biggest contributor to equity, such and such, and all that kind of stuff. There's, new jobs and all that kind of stuff. All of these people have to defend or continue to promote in order to save themselves. So, I think I've mentioned on here before, I had to listen to a 1-hour presentation from someone in my department who is would be in a category, in a BIPOC category. Okay. Maybe a BIPOC. Anyway, I was trying to think, what does that mean? No, maybe not a BIPOC, but in a category, in an intersectional category. An hour-long presentation about how we as a department had not rated 2 minority candidates exactly the same, which was judged as racist. So I had an hour-long presentation about how it was racist to not judge the 2 minority candidates exactly at the same level. And I'm thinking to myself, first of all, it was hell to go to listen to this crap, but also I wanted to say, how exactly do you think you got hired if we're all so racist? Are you so exceptionally wonderful that we were on that one occasion? Well, wait a minute, there's a few others that we were able to overlook it. If so, why the hell are you at this podunk little state university when you could be at Harvard if you're that wonderful to overcome,
I'm guessing she's not.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just thinking, like, so where does, so the terms that were called racist was, there were these, it's like, might not be as good a fit. So that's racist, right? So, something like, the presentation, maybe, the research might not be doable at our institution. How is this racist exactly? So but as you've said many times, when you can't find it, you just make it up. And they have to.
Yeah, they have to. Yeah. That's what your university is committed to, right? Because there isn't any racism in your university.
Right. If there were, and there, it's underground.
People would be delighted if they could find it. It would be like, I've discovered this nugget of gold. God.
Right.
They'd be delighted. But if you're a racist at your university or any other university, frankly, in the United States, you keep it
under wraps.
Otherwise, that's your life gone. You'll be all over Twitter. And if you're a racist age 18, then I don't think you should be demonized for the rest of your life. I think a path to redemption is, lots of people believe stupid things when they're a teenager.
That's right. That's what college is for, right? We're not teaching them what to think. We're teaching them how to think. And, so they should, be learning, about how to think about things and getting exposure to different things. Look at the black guy who's met with all those KKK people. These are people who
Daryl Johnson, is it?
Yeah, people who have been sort of won over. People are not irredeemable, even if they are racist.
Do you remember that wonderful movie, American History X? Did you ever see that?
No, I did not.
It's brilliant. It's a 1990s movie. Just get it and watch it. It is, it's all about a violent skinhead gang. and the leader of this skinhead gang gets involved in crime, and he gets sent to prison. And in prison, he reluctantly makes friends with a black person. And so when he comes out of prison, he's not racist anymore. But he goes back into the skinhead gang anyway in order to get his little brother out of it. And eventually he succeeds. And his brother has a black teacher. And there's this kind of also this interplay between the black teacher, I think, is played by the guy that, if I'm remembering rightly, that played Benjamin Sisko in Deep Space Nine. Another example of a diverse person from the 1990s who was the #1 person in the top sci-fi show at the time. It's really good, but there is a definite message of redemption in that, right? You can be saved and you can go on and be a decent person, and you don't have to wear that burden around your neck for the rest of your life, even if you did do some really bad things, like you were associated with a neo-Nazi group or whatever. If a university
or if you signed, for example, a document about Palestine, I mean, look, I don't think that these are people who, not like you said, when you're 18, we need to leave people room to change their minds, and we need to help people see the nuances, and it's not just about oppressor oppressed, just like it's not about black and white, and so we need to not condemn anyone for life,
I mean,
over something
like for example, there was a period of time when I was, I think, 18, that I fell for kind of this kind of pro-Hamas kind of, well, it wasn't Hamas then, but this kind of Palestinian nonsense. I fell for it. I think I bought one of their headscarves or something stupid like that. As an 18-year-old kid, and kids being 18-year-olds, they're going to make mistakes. And some of them, if they make a racist, like I saw some drunk 18-year-old at a university in America about a year back, and she was calling a black person this and that using, clearly racist language. And the black girl who was filming was going, "Oh my God, you just ruined your life. Oh my God, you just ruined your life." And she knew what she was doing. She uploaded the video to the internet, and that was it.
Right.
You're having like scholarship offers were rescinded for some guy who wanted to go to Harvard or something like that because he had said something insensitive on Twitter when he was 16 years old. Are you fucking serious? Is this the unforgiving, puritanical society we've become? It's like, yeah, he did something bad. Use it as a learning opportunity.
I don't know about you, but I did some not very nice things when not necessarily not very. I was nice to people because I was kind of like quiet and stuff, but I definitely did some stuff that I'm glad is not on the internet.
Yeah, me too. I can give you a general gist of what it was. I used to fight a lot, believe it or not.
Okay.
And I don't know. I wasn't always as nice to women as I could have been.
Yeah.
I kind of had one-night stands and then didn't return phone calls and stuff like that.
Yes.
I stopped doing all of that by the time I was 25, but certainly I have more than a few youthful indiscretions. Some of them being a bit more to do with chemicals as well.
And I do feel bad. I feel bad for them now that people don't get a chance to learn and grow, that they have to be fully formed, and and if they're not on the internet, I mean, I'm not on social media at all. And, but if I were 20, I couldn't do that. I mean,
you couldn't not be on social media at age 20.
No. So, yeah.
You know what? I have to say, I'm so glad that I live in a context like Japan where, they can still make mistakes. It's all right. A healthy society. Where all this cultural madness that is gripping the West. I mean, it's here a little bit, but it's not really made any major inroads with the general population.
But it is. You do see it. You've seen it at school,
right? And I mean, okay, here's another anecdote for you that would kind of support the notion that the status quo has not changed. At one of the universities at which I used to work, I'm not going to say which one. somebody who hates me because they think that I'm a far-right bigot and warn students about me being a far-right bigot, which is absolute nonsense, but there we go. Somebody who is regarded as bright but is very, very far from bright and very, very far from well-read on anything, really, apart from nonsense articles which he or she reads in order to impress her friends who wrote them. She's the only person who reads those articles, by the way. Kind of article that only one or two people ever read, if that. This person was risen to a position of, I used to get on with her, believe it or not, was raised to a position of power, even though she's not qualified. Actually, I'm more qualified than her. She was raised to a position of power, and she decided that one of the key recruiting points would be recruiting people based on how woke they were. You know, looking at what their dissertation title was or whatever, and seeing how well it aligned with critical social justice, basically.
So there's no requirement like around here for a DEI statement.
There's no requirement here either.
But still going to try to figure that out, because there are DEI statements, like people are required to do that here.
Yeah, which is wholly unconstitutional in my view.
Yeah.
You know, that goes back to the compelled speech argument. No, there's no requirement of the university to do that, but she decided that she was going to kind of work that in, and nobody stood up to her. And what happened was she made a place that I joined, which was a really great place to work in the first year with really great people. She just made it into a hellhole full of incompetent people who just cry racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia at absolutely everything, including at her. So she's getting all of this shit. So she's now lamenting, oh my God, what's happened? All of these people, they're crazy. And she can't even make the connection that, yeah, they're crazy because you hired crazy people based on your stupid ideology. But she won't make that connection ahead, not because she's too stupid. I mean, she's not very bright, but she's not that stupid.
Well, people are not motivated to see that.
No,
they're not motivated to see that. Yeah.
But then, like, other people in leadership are like, oh my God, all of these crazy woke people at the university, what have we done? You know, how are we going to fix this? And you can't you can fix it in 10 years' time, maybe.
I haven't heard anybody say, oh my God, all these crazy woke people, how can we fix it? I've not heard that. So maybe from the outside, but I'm not seeing that from the inside. And,
Other Japanese universities have realized the problem and have stopped hiring Westerners or are vetting Westerners to make sure that they're not woke. So, for example, you know, these Westerners at universities in Japan that are selecting for woke people are causing lots and lots of problems, and they're still on the rise in Japan. But it seems like there is a kind of an awareness of this problem amongst the Japanese now. And so, you know, when I applied to universities, I didn't get anything because I was applying to departments that were being run by Westerners. And then out of the blue, I was contacted and asked to work for one of the top universities in Japan. Out of the blue, kind of weird. Why didn't you come and work here? I was like, okay. And now they've just like basically given me as many classes as I want and the rest of it. So I'm kind of stable now, which is great. And the students are great, and there's no politics, and there's no woke people either. None. So there is an awareness that something's going on over here. I think.
Well, Helen, in our podcast with Helen Pluckrose, I mean, she indicated that she thought that, you know, also sort of a tide was turning in. You know, you just said that in Great Britain, maybe, you know, you're not seeing it, but Helen, in our interview, in our podcast, had suggested that she thought.
No, but I think we're talking about different things, right? I think that
okay.
I think that a tide may be turning in terms of the general public, right? The general public has never been for this, but I think the general public is aware of this now in a way that it might not have been, and are increasingly getting organized and pushing back against it. In that sense, I think a tide has turned. Where I don't think a tide has turned is within academia, right? Mm-hmm. The resistance within academia is organized now, which is good. But I don't see a balance of power shift within academia at all. I don't see it within entertainment.
Yeah.
I don't see it within the political bureaucracy of the UK. I don't see it within the Democratic Party. So I don't see it anywhere that matters in terms of the immediate exercise of power. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, and yeah, I don't see, I mean, I've said this, in meetings that we've been together in, but when Claudine Gay resigned, Roland Fryer didn't get an apology.
No.
Right. Carol Hooven didn't get her job back. That guy that said that Harvey Weinstein, I think it was Harvey Weinstein, deserved a defense attorney, didn't get his job back.
No.
And these are people that Claudine Gay actively, participated in their either cancellation attempt, or in Roland Fryer's case, a removal of tenure, and that kind of stuff. So she participated in, canceling people. And those are things that we know about that she participated in. So that there were other things, there were
Right.
subtle things, there were, there were atmospheric things that led to people feeling that they couldn't, that they had to self-censor, or, things like that. So when she resigned, to sort of circle back where we started from, and people are, giving, saying how, don't get me wrong, I'm not hoping that she gets ostracized like I'm ostracized. I'm not hoping for that. But people are, sort of rallying the troops around her, and sort of, encouraging her, and saying, you were wronged, and that kind of thing. She's getting that, and the people that she, participated in canceling are not, nothing is changing. So Harvard got their scapegoat. She gets to keep her job, and maybe even her presidential salary for a while. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's true or not. It hasn't turned the tide. It hasn't righted any wrongs. It hasn't, nobody's calling the rabbi. I guarantee you, nobody has called the rabbi that resigned from the anti-Semitism, the Harvard Committee on Anti-Semitism, who he resigned in protest. Nobody is calling him and saying, oh, now that Claudine Gay has resigned, please come back. We need you. That ain't happening. That ain't happening.
I think where the tide has turned, though, and that's among Jewish people. A lot of Jewish people who were, I mean, some of them are still for it, by the way. Some of them are still fully woke. But a lot of them who were in favor of wokeness have now realized that, this is completely...
I think I told you a couple years ago, I had sent an article, and it was an op-ed to a few of my Jewish friends they weren't my friends anymore, at school, who said, and I just said, look, this is why I'm fighting this. This is why I'm fighting for academic freedom, because it was about academic freedom and about anti-Zionism, and, self-censorship, and, that we need to have open communications and all this. That's what it was about. The article was about. And, I sent it because I said, this is why I'm fighting, the ideology that canceled me, because this is an aspect of it. And what I got back was, I don't see the connection. So
you do now, though, don't you?
I don't know if they do. I have been tempted to resend it, and said, sort of like
not?
There was this commercial, like, can you hear me now, about telephones, it's like telephone service. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah. I mean, I had a Jewish acquaintance who was very woke, who thought that she could kind of win me over to the woke side because she thought I was bright, and she thought, oh, I can win Mike over to the woke side. And this is kind of a bit of I told you so. I sent her a little bit of I told you so message, which she probably didn't like.
Yeah.
But I told you so. Like, this is the consequence of going on with this ideology.
This is this woke stuff is anti-Semitic. And,
well, it has to be, right? Because, Jewish people are generally successful. Not all of them, but they tend to be successful. So they are the oppressors.
They are the oppressors. Yeah. Yeah.
So. So yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of people, Jewish people, I think, and I mean, it's awful what is happening to people in Israel right now, and the
Oh God,
anti-Semitism that
yes.
is erupting. And look, that's another example that the tide hasn't turned. Amongst law enforcement, for example, you've got crowds of people in New York shutting down freeways, highways, whatever you Americans call it, motorways in the UK, shutting them down and chanting things in illegal protests, right? Because they're not doing it in a public square or somewhere like that.
Right.
It's actually a threat to public safety, and the police aren't touching them. They're just being allowed to do it.
Yeah, and look, I don't see any, yeah, I don't know. Again, we hope that the tide is turning, but we suspect it is not. And yeah, I did want to have this conversation on a podcast because, I was glad you suggested it, because I don't want people to sort of let their guard down and think that it's,
No.
we need to keep, we need to keep working on this.
There is one bit of positive news about this, though, that I can say, is that people are becoming more people, increasingly more and more people, and to a greater extent, people are becoming very aware of this stuff and very, very angry about it. So people never liked it, but I think that it's become so obvious now that you can't really continue to pretend that, oh, it's just a few kids with their hearts in the right place, but they're a bit eccentric, or it's one or two people with pink hair on a campus, right? You can't really make that argument, and very few people are.
No.
They're not making that argument, right? So you used to hear that cancel culture doesn't exist, it's just speaking truth to power. Nobody's really saying that even more, not even the wokies themselves. Really? Are there still one or two? I'm not seeing it on Twitter, right, for example. So
okay.
So I think that there is a growing awareness and a growing level of anger being directed against this. And so I think that that's positive, in the sense that I think that more and more people are going to challenge this. And that's good. Where is it going, though? We have a presidential election coming up.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And so you've got Biden, who seems to be increasingly abandoning Israel, and leaning towards the woke side of the Democratic Party, like by making speeches on diversity, equity, and inclusion and stuff like that, and saying how important that is. So he's doubling down on it, even though it's unpopular within the Democratic Party, but it kind of splits them as a party. I suspect that's because those are the people he surrounded himself with, right?
Yeah, I mean, my suspicion is people are telling him you have to address this. You can't, because it's not because he obviously, well, I mean, anybody in election time is in political jeopardy, but he is in political jeopardy and can't afford to lose any group. He basically is going to have to speak to everyone, and I think that's I mean, I don't know, as you know, I'm not, I know almost nothing about international affairs, but there's plenty to be sympathetic about, in terms of individuals, in Palestine, in Gaza, and in Israel. And you don't, and so I think unfortunately, I think there are better ways to communicate that aren't being used. So again, this is just a symptom of the problem of wokeness, is that and of just the divide in the country. And I was at the gym the other day, and somebody tried to introduce me to someone and said, oh, have you met this person? And I put out my hand, and he said, what party are you in? So he wouldn't shake my hand unless he knew what party I was in. So I just said, well, I'm unaffiliated. And, that was, I did that. But I think that, I think that suggesting, I don't know enough about international politics, but I think suggesting that Biden is pulling away from Israel is not to say that Biden supports Hamas.
No, he doesn't.
I don't think.
No,
I
I
don't
don't
think
think he does.
that's true at all. And so I think that death and destruction is what we can all condemn: rape, pillage, murder, and destroying hospitals. I don't care where the hospital is destroyed, and everything is horrible, even if it's for a good reason, for what is supposed to be a good reason. It is still a horrible thing for the people who are who need hospital care. And so I don't know.
I'm not going to condemn it, because if you've got a terrorist organization that has built their base underneath a hospital because they think
I mean, no,
under
it doesn't make it any
law,
less.
that becomes a legitimate target under international law.
It doesn't make it any
less horrible. No, it doesn't make it any less horrible. It's horrific. And that's one of the this is one of the things that this kind of underlines the fact that there are no grown-ups left in society. When you look at something like the Israel-Palestine situation, it's tempting to say, oh, there's an easy solution, or there is a solution that doesn't involve
there's
lots
a good
of
guy
horror.
and a bad guy.
No, there is no solution to that doesn't involve horror.
Right.
On both sides. Once a peace is achieved, there will still be horror. And it will take horror to achieve the peace, and after the peace there will be horror too. Horror won't go away. You can keep the monsters at bay, maybe, but you can't eliminate them entirely. And Israel's attempt to subdue Hamas is precisely that. They will subdue them. And if Hamas goes, which may happen, something equally awful will take its place, unless of course you get intervention from Saudi Arabia, which may happen. But we're talking, and the collapse of the Iranian regime, but we're going to be kind of going into international relations here. So is the tide turning? I think there are changes within the public consciousness, and I think that's reflected in people turning away from entertainment that is containing all of this woke stuff, and it just failing and failing and failing and failing. Has there been any changes within the news media? I don't feel so. Have there been any changes within the political structure of the UK, including, unbelievably, the Conservative Party? No, there's been no pushback against wokeness there, even though they said they were going to do that. Has there been any within academia? Absolutely not. Maybe a few Pyrrhic victories here and there, but certainly no change. If you have those woke checkboxes, that still very much advantages you. And if you don't have them, if you're just a fairly neutral liberal like me, you are often condemned as being far right, which is astonishing, but that remains the reality.
And are people talking to one another?
No.
I don't really see that.
Has there been any change, pushback against wokeness within the military that's been successful? The UK and the US military, nothing that I've observed. There is a change in the public consciousness that's there, and that's important. Will the tide turn?
And maybe at that level, people will start to talk to one another again, and maybe that will.
I'm worried about violence now in America.
I know.
So yeah. I look, if I don't believe that the election was stolen from Donald Trump at all. I don't believe there's any evidence for that, right? Trump is at once hugely popular with his fan base, but deeply despised, not just by Democrats, but by independents as well, right? People who could vote one way or the other. He's despised by them,
and by some Republicans. I mean, we're not.
Absolutely. You're right to point that out. And plenty of Republicans too. But his narrative was nevertheless credible to many Americans that the election was stolen, and now that they're trying to take him off the ballot in Colorado, that just makes that narrative all the more plausible. Well, it's not just
Colorado, it's multiple states.
That just makes his narrative all the more plausible, right? And it's not clear that even in those states, because they're all kind of blue states, right? Or purple states, ones that he might not need in order to gain the presidency. So, if he loses this bid to the presidency, that narrative that he was weaving is now credible, and that will then dramatically increase the likelihood of violence.
I'm not
saying it's credible to me.
No, but I'm not willing to blame the judicial system for making an argument credible. I'm not willing to say, oh, well, we shouldn't address the law because it might support
but the law is
someone's narrative.
but the law is
I think
the law is being addressed in a very dubious way, right? He hasn't been convicted of anything.
Well, I mean, but I'm just saying I'm not willing to. Look, I don't know.
I'm not making, but anyway, I'm not making a moral argument here. What I'm making, the point that I'm making is that these events that are happening are turning up the temperature.
Yes.
Right, on the right. The temperature has been turned up on the left for a long time, and we saw that with all of the BLM riots, right? That's a powder keg ready to explode. Could happen tomorrow, right?
Right.
It could happen tomorrow. This could it happened under a Biden presidency before, right? Under a left-wing presidency before. So it could happen tomorrow, right now. You imagine what happens if Trump wins.
Oh, yeah.
And if Trump loses, the temperature
Trump wins or Trump loses.
Right.
I mean, it does, yeah.
So you're just
because we're so divided. And I think that even people who loathe Trump may vote for Trump, because they're not willing to cross over, because that would be, it's like going over to the other side, even in the voting booth where it's private, so.
Yeah. So I mean, either way, the election goes, unless someone like Nikki Haley, unless she kind of gets the nomination and, she seems to be sane. And then she wins, and then maybe but even that might, erupt in violence. The temperature's being turned up so
apparently
high.
he posted that she's not an American, so she's a descendant of immigrants, and so he's trying to do the birther thing against her.
Fuck's sake.
So
and there's no need for him to do that because he's so far ahead in the polls. But it's just evidence of what a repulsive little individual he is.
Yeah, it's just a knee-jerk reaction. Yeah.
Because he can't help himself.
He can't help himself. No.
And, we saw that throughout his presidency. He was just writing incoherent nonsense on Twitter all the time. Like, why? How do you think that's a good idea? Yeah, so look, it's chaos.
So I don't think the tide is turning in terms of, so I guess, we're kind of talking about the other side. I don't think the tide is turning on that end either. Again, I don't think people are becoming more open to different ideas or more, on either. I still feel the division.
Yeah. And
I still feel unaffiliated.
Me too. And because so many of the anti-woke people were basically thrown with MAGA. Or kind of these weird anti-gay conspiracy theories that are being propagated by the likes of Ron DeSantis. Ron.
And I think they found they just like you and me and a lot of people at ILV were homeless, and so they ended up it's like the only place that would listen to them, the only people that would listen to them were and they ended up on the other side, just as extreme.
Right, and this is what I fear. So, I think that the tide will turn. I think it will turn in 2024. And I'm really terrified about what that's going to look like.
So you're not necessarily saying that the tide is turning in the way that we started this conversation, but a whole different way.
Yeah. I think the tide will turn and it will look very, 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 very ugly. Very ugly. Look, political change, in order for political change to work, it needs to either be emergent from the public consciousness, right? Popular ideas that people generally agree with, right? Or the only other alternative to having political change that does not emerge from the public consciousness is authoritarianism, anti-democratic authoritarianism. The public consciousness has turned and is increasingly anti-woke. And again, we see that from entertainment. We see what's happening to entertainment, how unpopular it is. And so, yeah, there's been a huge turn in the public consciousness. It may be that the hatred of Trump, because he's such a repulsive individual, might be enough for the tide not to turn in 2024. Biden might hang in, even unpopular as he is, because people just hate Trump that much. But trouble is brewing. You cannot have the elite institutions of any given society, being the political class, academia, the newspapers and entertainment. You cannot have them so out of whack with the public consciousness and there not be absolute chaos at some point. So, the political class is either going to have to exercise authoritarianism upon the population, and I can't see that happening in America. I could be wrong, but I don't see that happening in America. But that's the kind of thing that likes of James Lindsay and those guys are kind of warning about, right? That there will be a stolen election and the rest of it.
Right.
But, and again, the problem is it doesn't, by the way, they don't need to do that in order for that to create a problem. There just needs to be the public perception that they've done that, right?
Right.
So they didn't do that with the election of Biden, but there was already chaos because people believed that there was. With what's happened since then, that narrative is now being strengthened. So there's going to be even more chaos if Trump loses this time round. And if he wins, well, we saw what happened with the Black Lives Matter riots under Biden. They're going to be even worse this time round, and they're already,
you mean Obama?
Yeah, under Biden, right, and then Obama before that.
Right.
So yeah, they're going to be even worse this time round, and also agitated for by foreign intelligence agencies such as in Russia, and we think Qatar and China, definitely China. So yeah, you may kick the can down the line to 2025, and then maybe you can hope that you get a sensible Republican candidate in, or that you get a decent Democrat candidate in. Not 2025, the next presidential election after that, which will be 2028. You get a more sensible candidate in somewhere down the line. I don't know, but as things stand, it's 2024 looks like a really, really dangerous year. The tide is not turning within the elite institutions. If it would, then things wouldn't look this ugly. But I think that there is a collision course between the general public and elite institutions, and the tide will turn, and it will be very, 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 very ugly, involving lots and lots of political violence from both sides. And on that cheery note...
Basically, it's not turning in universities. So
not just the universities. It's not turning within the elite institutions of society. Any
of the, yes, I would agree with that. Elite institutions, the tide is not turning. Yeah. And the public sense that it is, that it's turning, may, as you point out, actually cause more disruption, because we're going to be another division. Wait a minute, we thought, we
thought things were changing. Oh, this is more evidence that our institutions are rigged and corrupt and so on and so forth. Let's tear everything down in a mob. I mean, this is maybe the most dangerous year for America. Again, it might be kicked down the line a bit. If somebody other than Trump is the presidential nominee, but that seems really unlikely right now. So Trump winning, Trump losing. It's going to be a interesting year. If you can, stay away from the big cities. That's what I would say. Around about the time of the election, certainly try and cast your vote and get out as quickly as you can. All right, good. Thank you very much.